Daf is Menachos Daf Gimel. And we're going to start on the bottom of Beis. So what are we talking about in our Gemara? Let's start just a quick review. Our Mishnah has said, similar to the Mishnah's Zvachim, that all the Zvachim all the Menachos that were brought up with the wrong intent, you have not fulfilled your obligation. But they are kosher, but you have not fulfilled your obligation. They're valid offering, but you have not fulfilled your obligation. And then Rabbi Shimon in the Brisa at the top of Beis says you have fulfilled your obligation. Even in the case of a chatos, a minchas for a chota and the minchas kanos, which are sin offerings, you fulfill your obligation. And not only the kosher, you also fulfill your obligation. The problem is, it can't be that Rabbi Shimon really says that simply because the price that's cited at the bottom of Beis says Rabbi Shimon says you have not fulfilled your obligation, and so therefore, how do we deal with this contradiction within Rabbi Shimon? Now, the Gemara said in passing three answers, which we'll explore more on today's daf: the answer of Rabbah, the answer of Rava, and the answer of Rav Ashi. Now that's in chronological order, and the answer of Rabbah. And so the Gemara says that the answer of Rabbah is where you said, one is where you said for the purpose, hold on, let me just review it exactly so we don't make a mistake exactly. But the answer of Rabbah is one is where there was a change, Shinoi Kodesh, and one is where there was Shinoi Ba'alim. Meaning to say where you changed the type of mincha was, then it would be kosher because Rabbi Shimon's logic is Maseh Mochichim. Your actions indicate. So even though you're saying I'm doing this for a different type of mincha, you could see from the pan of the mincha which mincha you're doing it. So Maseh Mochichim, your actions indicate what it is. But if it was Shinoi Ba'alim, was a change in the owner, then it wouldn't be Maseh Mochichim, and so therefore would not fulfill its obligation. A second approach to dealing with it is this just simple distinction between mincha and zevach. That one is where you say, I'm doing this kmitza for a different mincha. Then Rabbi Shimon would say that under those circumstances, that Rabbi Shimon would say it's okay. And the second case where he says disqualified is saying I'm doing it for a zevach. So our Mishnah says in no case where you said that our Mishnah where it says that it's disqualified is where you say I'm doing this mincha for another mincha, and that's what our Mishnah is saying. But Rabbi Shimon says if you say you're doing it for another mincha, then it would be okay. But if you say you're doing it for another zevach, then it wouldn't be okay. And so so then what's the answer of Rav Ashi? Rav Ashi's answer is that it's just a technical answer. One is where you use the word mincha. If you use the word minchas machvas, then it's not going to be good. But if you just said machvas or machashas and change that, then it would be valid. So that's the distinction between the brises. We saw this. We're going to see this in more in depth today. But now we're on the bottom of Beis, 10 lines from the bottom, and the Gemara is saying, well, basically, Rabba's answer is that there's a distinction between Shinoi Kodesh and Shinoi Ba'alim, that where Rabbi Shimon says where it was just a change in the type of mincha, your actions prove it's that type of mincha. And so therefore it doesn't matter what you said, we're still going to say that it's okay because we don't really believe what you said. So the Gemara is going to bring Simon, Ola, Malach, Marat, Chatasov, Kochikachim, Kochikam, all these different cases where it's clear that your actions prove it, that's not what you meant to do, but what you meant to say. But yet we stand in Mesechas Vachim that these are not valid offerings. And so therefore, what would Rabbi Shimon say under those cases? Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon argue there too? So this is a nice review of Zvachim, and as we said many times at the beginning of Masechtos, we often see that there's psichos, that there's openings which really are summaries. And here in this case, it's summary of the relationship between Menachos and Zvachim. So the Gemara says, let's start. So if according to Rabbi Shimon, your actions indicate what you really intended to do, and we ignore what you said, and therefore would be a valid offering. Well, if that's the case, Ola Sa'of, if you brought an Ola of a bird, Shemoko Amala, you did the Malika above, but you said, I'm doing it Mishim Chata Sa'of, but you say, I'm doing it for a Chata Sa'of, Teratzeh. We should say it should be a valid offering. and you fulfill your obligation. Why? Because we don't care what you said there. We know you're doing the mulika above, and it's obviously for an olas oaf. Because if it would be a chatas oaf, you're supposed to do it below. So that's the first question. The Gemara answers, what are you talking about? Atu chatos ofa ma'amilesa amar malika b'kol makom is be'achshir. No, remember in Zvachim, you could do a chatos off. You could do the malika on a chatos off above. So that's not a question. Well, the second question, olos off. The Gemara is just raising these questions because the Gemara is going to get to the punchline soon. But the second question against Rebbe against Rabba's answer is from the following. It says, "Osa of shemitza damalamala l'shem chatas of tirata." Well, now it's just the reverse. Let's say you did the osa of and you pressed. You didn't do the malika, but you did the mitzah, which is the pressing of the blood, pressing of the bird against the mizbech, and you did it above. And you said, "I'm doing it for a chatas of tirata." It should still be effective. Because it's clearly, we don't care what you said, it's clearly an oasof. Because if it would really be that you're doing it for a chatas, first of all, you should do it below. And hazah, and you should have been doing the hazah. You should be by a chatas, so if you do the throwing of the blood from the bird, you don't just press it like you do with an olah. So therefore, why would we say it's not effective for your obligation there? It should be effective. So the Gemara says no. It will be effective there because Amri, the one who sees it, will still assume he's doing it for an olah, because he'll say Dilma. He won't assume he's necessarily doing it for an olah because he'll say Dilma mitzoy de basar azahu da amar. Dilma mitzoy de basar azahu. Maybe he's actually doing the pressing after already did the sprinkling. Maybe he did it like a chatas. He did the sprinkling. Damar mar mitzah dama b'kol makom. Because he could do the mitzvah below, he could do the pressing in the bird, and then maybe he first did that sign, and now he's pressing it. So his actions don't necessarily prove that it's an olah. Well, next question. Well, let's say you do the chatas ha'of, and you sprinkle the blood below, and you say, I'm doing it for an olah, it should be effective. Why? Because it's clearly not an olah. Because the chatas ha'of is the only one that does azah and not an olah. So it's clearly, we don't care that you say it's an olah. It's clearly a chatas. The olas ha'of, because if it was an olah, it was supposed to be done above, and you're doing pressing, not squeezing. So now the Gemara gets to the punchline, which is a chiddush, and it says, hachinami. You know what? This is actually consistent with what Rabbi Shimon said, which we should have focused on this line of Rabbi Shimon from the beginning. Rabbi Shimon said that all the menachos that you do, shelo shma, are still kosher, lefi. And what was the language of Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon's language was lefi she'ena menachos. I just want to look. I'm looking back at the brisa here. It said she'ena menachos domos l'zvachim, because menachos are not like zvachim. So he says they're not like animal offerings, but that's not ophos, meaning to say the ophos would also be okay. The ophos would also be okay because your actions can indicate what it is. So we always join this distinction between menachos and zvachim, and not menachos and ophos. So Gemara has retreated a little bit from Rabbi Shimon's position, but the Gemara is not done. Gemara says, well, what about kache? Remember that the kachim karbanos have to be slaughtered in the north. Right? So you took your kachim and you slaughtered in the north, and you say, I'm doing it for kachim. Well, you should have fulfilled your obligation. Why? Because your actions indicate that it's obviously the case for a kachim and not kachim. The kachim b'darmu abedlu. Because if it was really kachim, he would have done it in the south. Gemara says, no. Amor d'amar rachmana af bedaram. Bedaram v'lo b'tzafon mi'amar. No, we never said that you can't slaughter the kachikolim in the north. It said it could even be done in the south. The Tanan, as we learned in Zvachim, so that's not a question because clearly the kachikolim could actually be slaughtered in the north. So the fact that if you say I'm slaughtering in the north for the purpose of kachikolim, that doesn't mean that you obviously are doing it for kachim only. So the Gemara says, yeah, but let's do the reverse case. Kachikalim sheshachtom bedarom L'shem kachim. Let's say you took your shlomim and you slaughtered it in the south, and you say, I'm doing it for the purpose of a kachim. Well, that should be fulfill your obligation. Why? Masay and mochichan because your actions indicate that it's a kachim because the kachikalim, your actions indicate it's obviously kachikalim. The e kachikachim, because if it was really a kachikachim, then if you say I'm doing this garban for the purpose of an olah, but you're doing it in the south, so if it was really an olah, it would have been done in the north. So clearly it should work there, according to Rabbi Shimon. Nor says no. Why? Because a person who sees it would say Amrei kachikachim, and it would say, yeah, he really thinks he's bringing the olah. Umiyavar. He's just doing it wrong. He's making a mistake and he's slaughtering it in the south. So therefore, his actions don't indicate anything. We could be dealing with a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. Well, then the Gemara says, well, if that's what you're going to say, nami. Well, then let's go back to the case of Rabbi Shimon. Let's say you take the machavas and you say, I'm doing it in your flat pan for the purpose of a marcheshes. Nami, you should also say, Haidika kamatzlei umarcheshes amar hai b'marcheshes nederu d'maisila. So hai b'marcheshes. It's a little bit of tricky language, but why don't you just say if the person is doing the komets and when he does it, he says, "I'm doing this machab." He takes it in the machabas. And he says, I'm doing it for the purpose of a marcheshes. Why don't we say that his actions are not proving it? Nami, we could say, hi, the komets laying marcheshes. The reason why he says, I'm doing the komets for the marcheshes, the one who sneezes it will say, Amar, why doesn't he say, hi, the marcheshes nadar? Why don't we say, actually, he took the vow to do it as a marcheshes, and the only reason why he put in the machavas is the marcheshes. It's really a marcheshes, and he made a mistake, he's doing the machavas. Meaning to say, your actions don't prove it by a mincha either, because you could just say the guy is doing it wrong. And so the fact that you're saying, I'm doing this for marcheshes, doesn't mean it's doing it for a machavas, and you're just saying the wrong words. It could really be, you're doing it for marcheshes, and you put it in the wrong pan. So the Gemara says, well, okay, well, in order to understand this, this is, as we say, a survey of the whole Menachos. You have to know the Mishnah at the end of Kuf Beis Amud Beis. So you have to know the Mishnah, God willing, we'll get to. I can't wait to study with everybody for the next 100 days, and we'll get to the end of Menachos, Kuf Beis Amud Beis, and it says, awesome, kinami b'marcheshes nadir, ki ma'islu b'machavas, machavas avia. No, there's a fundamental halacha about Menachos. Even if you say, I'm bringing a marcheshes, you vow to bring a marcheshes, but the halacha is that if you would put it into a machavas, it would become a machavas. Kedetnan, ha'omer, harei alai b'machavas. You say, I have to bring a machavas, vehevi b'marcheshes, and then you brought it in a marcheshes, or you say b'marcheshes, or you say, harei alai, I have to bring a marcheshes, vehevi b'machavas. And then he says, and I have to bring a machavas, meshahevi v'yidei nidro yatsa. His vow becomes whatever he did put it in, that's what it became. So if you put it in the machavas, it is a machavas. If you put it in the marcheshes, it is a marcheshes. And so therefore, so we see from here that once you put it in that pan, that's what it is. So then if at that point you said, I'm doing it for a purpose of marcheshes, we don't care because it is a machavas at that point. So the Gemara says, yeah, that's only but you have to go weiter in that Mishnah. That's only if you say Harei Alai. But we know that the next case there is the Dilma. There's another case there. Let's say he would look at this flower, and if he would say to the flower about this flower, Harei Zu, this flower is holy. Lahavi b'machavas. This flower is holy to bring as a machavas. Vehevi b'marcheshes, and in that case, it's different. If he brought it in the marcheshes, keditnan, we learned there we don't care if he brought it in the marcheshes. There, in that case, it would remain a machavas. Keditnan, harei zu ahavi b'machavas. If he says this flower is something to be brought in a machavas, vehevi b'marcheshes, and then he brought it in the marcheshes, or if he says b'marcheshes, behavi b'machavas, then it would be psua, areizu psua. And so therefore, why don't we, going back to our case here also, we should say it would be disqualified because of Shinoi Kodesh, because we know that it could be different in those scenarios. Your actions don't necessarily prove that what it is. The Gemara says, you know what? Rabbanan, yeah, that is, if when you get to Kuf Beis, Beis, you're going to see that that's actually the position of the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan are not the ones who say this rule of Maseh Mochichin. Achinami, they would agree that a mincha that was in a machavas that you did for a marcheshet, your actions don't prove, because it could be either one. And so therefore, but this this concept of Maseh Mochichin is only the position of Rabbi Shimon. But Rabbi Shimon there says Rabbi Shimon doesn't say that halacha by Harezu. Even though Rabbi Shimon af yedei nidro yatsa, that Rabbi Shimon says if you say that Rabbi Shimon says in this case that if you say I'm bringing a machavat and you brought it as a marcheshet, not only is it fulfilled its obligation, you've also fulfilled your vow that you made to bring a machavas, even though you put it in the marcheshes. We see from here, we see from here that when a person says which utensil I'm going to be obligated to bring it in, it doesn't mean anything. That means to say you can fulfill the mincha of the machavas even in the marcheshet. And so therefore, Loshna Marzu, Loshna Amar Alai. So Rabbi Shimon does not draw this distinction between Loshna, whether he said Hare Alai or Hare Zu. Rabbi Shimon says, therefore, Maseh Mochichin Olav. So we do not raise the question of Rabbi Shimon from the end of Menachos. Well, the Gemara goes back to Zvachim for a little bit now, and the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, so the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, well, what about the following? Well, let's say you take your ola and you're slaughtering it in the north like you're supposed to, but you slaughter it for a chatas. Why do we say that you haven't fulfilled your obligation? You should fulfill your obligation. Why? Because Maseh Mochichin Olav, according to Rabbi Shimon. Why? Dahai Zachar, because an ola is a male and a chatas is a female animal. You can clearly tell the difference. Mer says, no, given the ikos sayar nasi to Zachar who lo yedia. No, there is a chatas that's a male. That's the chatas of a nasi. And so therefore you can't necessarily tell what from his actions, and so therefore Rabbi Shimon would say it's not Maseh Mochichin. So the Gemara says, but let's say he says, I'm bringing this olah, Amar l'shem chatos yachid, Michael Memer. Yeah, but let's say he says, I'm bringing this olah for the purpose of an individual chatos. There, clearly Rabbi Shimon would agree that Maseh Mochichin Olav, because it's an olah and not a chatas. Visu, chatas yachid sheshachta l'shem olah tirat. And also if it's the opposite, let's say you take your female chatas and you say, I'm slaughtering for the purpose of an olah is a male, it's clearly not a male. The chatas nekeva of olah zachar, and the chatas is a female and the olah is a male. So therefore, your actions would indicate that it's not that, and so therefore it should be a valid offering. The Gemara says mechsaya ba'alya. No, you can't tell the genitalia because the sheep has a tail which is covering it up. Gemara says, well, that only works if it's a sheep, but I see seira. But if you brought a goat, Michael and Mamar, the goat, it doesn't have a big tail to cover up the genitalia, so you could tell if it's male or female. So the Gemara says, "El bein zvarcham when the kevo slava daitu deinchi." Yeah, people aren't going to notice. People aren't paying attention, and nobody's going to really be looking that closely. The Gemara says, "Really? Well, what about this case? Pesach shashachtu l'shem asham. Let's say you slaughtered your Pesach for an asham. You should fulfill your obligation according to Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because a Pesach has to be under a year and the Asham has to be under 2 years old, or Ben Shtayim. So Gemara says, no, even the Ika Asham Nazir Asham Mitzora. No, there's the Asham Nazir and the Asham Mitzora, which is also under a year old, like the Pesach the lopsikoi, so it's not obvious. So Gemara says, okay, fine. Let's say he says l'shum Hashem gzelos l'shum Hashem milos ma'in kamema. According to Rabbi Shimon, that would be good because there it has to be there it has to be 2 years, and Pesach is 1 year, and your action should indicate that it's not that. And why don't we say that your offering would fulfill your obligation under those circumstances? And furthermore, Hashem gezelos v'Hashem li'ilos shachton Hashem Pesach liratzu. The Pesach ben shana, Mahani ben shtei and more on the reverse. Let's say you took your Hashem gezelos Hashem milos, which are supposed to be 2, and you slaughter it for the purpose of a Pesach, which is supposed to be 1. It should work because your actions indicate that it's not a Pesach. So the Gemara says, okay, people can't always tell between a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. Some 2-year-olds look like 1-year-old. You see the Gemara is basically knocking itself into a corner here with forced answers. So the Gemara says, well, what about this case? Well, an asham is always brought from sheep, and let's say you took your goat and you slaughtered it for the purpose of an asham. Well, it should obviously still work because the goat, which is the goat of the chatas, which you slaughter for the asham, it should obviously work because an asham can only come from a sheep, and the goat that's brought for chatas has no wool. It has hair and not wool. So you could obviously tell the difference between the goat and the sheep. So the Gemara says, no, they'll say, Amri Dichri Uchmahu. They'll say this is a black sheep. And the black sheep doesn't have wool. It has the hair. It could look like a goat. Or the Gemara says, okay, I'll give you an example that you can't refute. You know that you're supposed to bring a korban pesach from a sheep that's under a year old or a goat under a year old. Let's say you bring in a big bull. And I'm bringing in my egel or my par. I'm bringing a calf of an or a shlamim or a bull of a chatas, and I say I'm doing it for a Pesach. Obviously, it's not a Pesach. The asham, or I'm saying I'm doing it for the purpose of this asham. It's clearly not a sheep. Liratzu, the ego par Pesach v'asham leka, because you never have a calf or a bull by korban Pesach or an asham. The Gemara says, you know what? You're right. In Achinami, you're correct. Okay, it took us a whole amud of Menachos, Gimel, and Aleph, and the Gemara says, when Rabbi Shimon says that Menachos are not similar, She'ena Menachos domos l'zvachim, he means my zvachim, rov zvachim. Menachos are not similar to most zvachim, but yes, Einachinami, if the zevach would impossibly, if the korban of the animal would be impossible for it to be that, yes, Einachinami, the actions would indicate that it's actually a valid offering. The actions would indicate that that's not what you had in mind, and the offering will fulfill your obligation. So that's what Rabbah says. Rabbah says, okay, you're right. My zvachim, ro zvachim. Rabbah says, now let's move on to Rabbah's answer. Rabbah gave a different explanation of the distinction between Rabbi Shimon's bride. He says, Rabbah says, lo kasha kam kometz mincha l'shum mincha kam kometz mincha l'shum zevach. He says, well, let's just say if you did the mincha for the purpose of the mincha, then it would fulfill your obligation. But if you did it for the purpose of a zevach, it would not. Why? Mincha was shum mincha. If you did the mincha for the purpose of the mincha, it would work because there's a pasuk. It says zos Torah sa mincha, and Rabbi Shimon says Torah achas l'kol menachos. It's not that your actions indicate it, but it's a pasuk. Pasuk says this is the Torah for all the menachos. Mincha, so meaning to say, it works. Whatever mincha you said, it'll work because it's one law for everybody. But if you're saying I'm bringing this mincha, I'm bringing this kometz for the purpose of a zevach, for the purpose of, let's say, an olah or a shlamim, that won't work. Why? Zos Torah mincha v'zevach oksiv. It doesn't say this is the law of the mincha and the zevach. Gemara says, but what about the fact that it says v'atanem and neisha matzah mochichin olel kamar? Rabbi Shimon said, he didn't say a pasuk. Rabbi Shimon didn't say anything about a pasuk. He just said, no, the reason why if you bring a mincha and you say, I'm doing it for this mincha, for the marchashas and not the machavas, your actions prove that it's not that. No, the Gemara says, it's just the opposite of what we thought. Hachikamar, afagav de machshava delo minkrahi viti paso. He says the opposite. Rabbi Shimon says, even though even though it's a machshava that's not recognizable, meaning to say, even though the menachos are not similar to zvachim, meaning to say, when you do the zevach, the machshava, the actions could be the same. But by menachos, it's clearly not the same. So therefore, we would think it's disqualified. Af agav de machshava du minkarahi tipasel. You might think, therefore, it's disqualified because it's clearly impossible for it to be that. Zos Torah mincha Torah achas l'kol menachos. Meaning to say, it's the opposite of what we thought. Not that because we said because it's clearly you didn't mean that. But you might have thought in this case, even though by a zevach, you might have thought that it should be okay because your action could possibly be that. And by mincha it can't be. Nevertheless, we say by a mincha it's okay under those circumstances because of the verse. So what does it mean when Rabbi Shimon said, but by an animal offering we don't say that? We say afagav de shlita achas l'kulon. Even though by zevach that the actions are the same, it's one slaughter. Nevertheless, zos toras mincha v'zevach oksiv. It doesn't say zos toras mincha v'zevach. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, el me'ata. Well, there are other pesukim where they say zos toras el me'ata chatas chaylev. Let's say you have to bring a chatas because you ate chaylev. Sheshachta l'shem chatas dam, and you said, I'm doing this chatas chaylev for the purpose of my sin with blood, or l'shem chatas avodas kochanim, or idolatry, or l'shem chatas nazir. Ushim chatos mitzora, then take kasher in all those cases. Not only is it kosher, tirata, you should fulfill your obligation. No, Amar Rachmana, those Torah chatas. The Torah says this is the law of the chatas. Torah achas l'chol chatos. One, meaning to say that you change it for the chatas, it should be effective. Mar says, Rabbi Shimon hachinami. Yeah, indeed, Rabbi Shimon would say that would work. Rabbanan, and according to the Rabbanan who say it's disqualified, according to the Rabbanan, we would say Ha'amar Rava, but we have the position of Rava, Chatos Chayov Shashachto Shem Chatos Dam, or Shem Chatos Avot Chavim Kshera. But the Rabbanan would also say it's kosher because they have one shame, and so therefore it's not uprooting it. But L'Shem Chatos Nazir or L'Shem Chatos Mitzora Psua Da'ani Ba'adayuninu. No, but the Rabbanan would say it would be kosher by a chatas, and you fulfill your obligation, but by certain chatas, but not by the chatas nazir or chatas mitzora, because those have the olos with them, and they're similar to the olos. He said, no, the Rabbanan would say all of them are disqualified. Shachar oso chatas, l'shem oso chatas. It has to be the same. Now, the Rabbanan position here is a little bit of a tangent, is a dispute. But anyway, we've seen now the position of Rabbah, who says really Rov Zvachim, and Rava, who says it's based upon the fact of the Psukim, and of Zos Toras HaMincha. And now we come to the position of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi Amar Lo Kasha, Kam B'Kometz Machavas L'Shum Marchashes, Kam B'Kometz Minchas Machavas L'Shum Minchas Marchashes. One is where you pick up the komet and I'm doing this, even though it's coming from a machavas, you say I'm doing this for the purpose of marchashes. That would be okay. That's the first brisa. But one is where you took the minchas machavas, you take the machavas, and you pick up the komet and you say I'm doing it for the purpose of the minchas marchashes. That would not work. Why? Machavas l'shum marchashes, or minchas machavas, which you say I'm doing the komets for the marchashes, that would work. Why? Because we're saying really what your intent at that point is b'mana kamachashev. Umachshava b'mana apostle. You're not thinking about the carbon. You're just thinking about the offering. You're just thinking about the utensil. And a shinoi in the kli, a change of thought in the utensil does not disqualify. Technical answer. But minchas machavas l'shum minchas marchashes. But if you say the minchas machavas, and then now I'm doing it for minchas marchashes, but mincha de pasaba the minchas marchashes, and then if you do those language, the mincha de pasaba machshava machashev. There he's having this thoughts for a mincha that's a machshevet poseles that disqualifies it, and so therefore it's going to be disqualified. The Gemara says, but wait, even according to Ravashi, doesn't it say because its actions indicate that that's not the case? It has nothing to do with the actions. The Gemara says, no. Even though his actions are recognizable, and clearly he means when he says minchas tipasel, it's still we're going to say it's disqualified. And why do we not say that? What does Rabbi Shimon mean when he says by zvacham we don't say this? Afagav de shchita achas lekulan and zricha achas lekulan and kabbalah achas lekulan. Even though by zvacham there's one shlita for everyone, there's one zvicha for everyone, and so therefore we might think that it would be okay. We're going to say the pasla bei zvicha, the pasla bei machshava kamachashev. We're saying that by zvacham we're going to say that since by zvicha that where the disqualifying thought is disqualifying, so we're going to say that he had the disqualifying thought, and so therefore he has the thought about the carbon and not on the utensil, and therefore it's disqualified. So I'm away Ravacha the Ravashi. Well, what about in the case where, according to your position, Rabbi Shimon only says it where it's a machshava on the utensil and not on the mincha? Let's say he says achareva mishum belula. Let's say he says I'm doing this dry mincha, the mincha of a sinner, for the purpose of a mincha that's mixed together. Amayam Rabbi Shimon. Why does Rabbi Shimon say it's kosher? Here, it's for sure not on the utensil. Amrway, no. Ravashi would say l'shum bila ba'alma. He just intended it for the mixture. Yachi l'shum shlomim nami. Well, if that's the case, if he slaughtered the olah for the purpose of the shlomim without mentioning carbon nami, why don't we say l'shum shlomim ba'alma? He just has, I want to bring peace to the world. That's why we're doing it. He says, no, you can't say that. A carbon itself is called a shlomim. The tziva makriv is dam as shlomim, or zorik as dam as shlomim. Mincha gufa mi ikre blula. A mincha itself is not called a blula. Because the call mincha blula b'Hashem, so blula b'Hashem ikre blula stamelo ikre. So that's the Gemara now. Tomorrow's daf, which we're not going to get to because we went. Usually we do 26 minutes, 27. We went longer. Gemara is going to discuss why each of these three Amoraim don't adopt the position of the other. Okay, we'll stop here. Yashikoch to everybody.